it's on. Careful. 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 Oh, what did I just do? He's kind of big.
Should be bigger.
Yeah, but how do you know that? Why?
Well, snakes grow at different rates. But
Isn't it still tied to age, though?
not exactly.
No?
Not captive, at least, because he's obviously scented because he didn't have it.
Yeah, sure.
He's 3 years old, and she said that he would be almost fully grown.
Did she get him as a baby?
That's what it's.
Oh. Then, yeah, I guess that makes sense. That's why.
And you're like,
No, this light flickers. The camera. Why? I have no idea. Does the mic sound funny when I'm here? Probably just because I'm so far away. There's a cap on it. So if it's not picking up enough noise, then it cuts off to not pick up background noise. That's probably what it is. It was probably trying to decide whether it should be turned on to listen to me talk or not. Because it's set to only care if I'm like right up on it. But let me know, because if this sounds not good, then we have a problem. If talking at normal volume real close isn't working like normal. It's not a duh, though. I mean, I've finagled it with many different like plugins and settings. So I mean, it's not a given. The audio streams. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. All right, where are we at? Oh, nap. Yeah, it sounded weird because I was leaned back talking to Kat away from the mic. So it's set to cut off unless I'm right up on it. So sometimes if you pay attention, the first like letter that I say of a word after there's a silence, sometimes it'll silence it when I listen to the recordings later because it's trying to decide whether to pick it up or not. But it should be good. When I'm this close, it should be good. What the heck? Somebody's in the Discord voice channel named Piapia. I have no idea who that is. Is this a new person? They have like a dolphin at the end of their name. Is that a dolphin?
You're asking the wrong person.
It's something. Pia.
I don't know what that is.
But it's like a fish of some kind. It's
really
an aquatic animal.
My face wasn't super close to
No, it's over here. I think you're good. All right. I think maybe we'll go over the background while we wait. Are you able to hit that light or no? The overhead.
What about it?
Can it be off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One off right now?
Yeah. I mean, whenever you can. Oh, that's Pastora. Okay. Got it. Got it. Well, how would I know
Way to
that?
know your audience, buddy.
I know Pastora. I don't know all of her aliases. She goes, it is me. It is you. I got it. I got it. I'll remember. Probably not. But after a few times, I'll remember. All right, so Book of James, the very beginning. James did not specifically identify himself. I'm just going to read an overview so we have a general grasp, and then we'll go in, obviously, like normal, deeper as we go, because you're going to forget all of this anyways. He did not specifically identify who he was. Most of scholarship believes that it was Jesus's half-brother. James was not a follower of Jesus during the Savior's time on earth. References to that are in several of the Gospels, but eventually became an apostle in the vein of Paul, as one who had seen and believed the Lord post-resurrection. 1 Corinthians talks about it. Galatians talks about it. After witnessing the Lord's resurrected body, James became one of the leaders of the church at Jerusalem. If you remember, in 2 Corinthians, which we just went through, the majority of it was in the context of trying to get the idiots at Corinth to understand why they needed to give money to the church at Jerusalem, because they were socially, culturally, and demographically of a better standard of living. So you're trying to get them to not be greedy, to give money to the church at Jerusalem. Well, that's where James was. So just within a general context, so you understand. Peter singled him out among the other Christians there, following Peter's miraculous release from prison. Reference there in Acts, which we've already gone through. So if you want to catch up on that, just go back and watch those. James made the deciding speech at the Jerusalem Council, and Paul called James one of the pillars of the church. Where are we? As one of the chief leaders in the church at Jerusalem, James wrote from that city prior to the meeting of the Jerusalem Council, which Luke recorded in Acts 15. At the council, James, along with Peter and Paul, affirmed the decision to take the gospel message to the Gentiles. This council met in AD 49, meaning James likely wrote his letter in AD 45 or sometime in there between there and about 48. Such a significant event at the Jerusalem Council warranted comment from James, as he was writing to a Jewish Christian audience. But James made no mention of Gentile Christians at all, which is a meaningful thing to understand. Most of the New Testament authors would touch on a little bit of both. Most of the things that were written about, they touched on a little bit of both. Not in the case of James within that specific context. It was just towards the Jewish audience. Making an early date for the letter most likely. In fact, it was likely the New Testament book. It was likely the first New Testament book, which again is why we're reading it. So now from here forward, we're going to go chronologically, which is already severely messed up because we've done Acts and we've done 1st and 2nd Corinthians, but those were kind of in order with each other. But now we're going back to the very beginning, and we're going to roll through in rough chronological order, with James being mostly agreed upon to be the first book. Why is James so important? The book of James looks a bit like the Old Testament book of Proverbs, dressed up in New Testament clothes. And it's very true. And you're going to get the feel real quick. It's very poetic, and you want to make bumper stickers out of things that it says. It's good one-liners. Pastors love it because they get their little one-line tags in here. Its consistent focus on practical action in the life of faith is reminiscent of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, encouraging God's people to act like God's people. James is one of my favorite books because it completely crushes the idea of grace alone. This idea that you can just believe in God and you're good. It destroys that concept. In absolute clarity, it destroys. It's not rough, loose ideas of combating that idea. It's absolute destruction of the concept of grace alone. The pages of James are filled with direct commands to pursue a life of holiness. He makes no excuse for those who do not measure up. In the mind of this early church leader, Christians evidence their faith by walking in certain ways and not others. Action, behavior, not what you feel, what you do. For James, a faith that does not produce real life change is a faith that is worthless. The big ideal we're going to skip because we're going to get through that, and we do not need to talk about how to apply it. We'll go there too. Shannon. Lilith. Is Lilith, are you goddess Lily, or are you a different Lilith? Are you Lilith from the Bible? Wasn't she a succubus? She was. She was, in a way, depending on the myth. Sometimes TikTok makes a noise. It freaks me out. Did you not hear that?
No.
Okay, I'm just crazy then. All right. It's hard to disagree with James on that. It's impossible to disagree with him. He was lovely. All right, the little excerpt they have here in the beginning, sometimes called the Proverbs of the New Testament, the book of James practically and faithfully reminds Christians how to live. From perseverance to true faith of controlling one's tongue, submitting to God's will, and having patience, this book aids readers in living authentically and wisely for Christ. Many have claimed that James and the Apostle Paul deferred on the question of faith versus works, but in reality, the spiritual fruit that James talks about simply demonstrates the true faith of which Paul wrote. Their writings are complementary rather than contradictory, possibly one of the earliest of the New Testament writings, roughly 40 to 50 AD. If you narrow that in, like we just said, which I agree with, is closer to between 45 and 48 AD. The book is believed to have been written by Jesus' brother, James. And they have a reference there to Galatians, which is, it's an indication that perhaps that's where it came from. Oh, it is you. That's funny. I was like half kidding. I kind of figured you were someone new. I nailed that. Very rarely do I nail that or something like that, but I got it. That makes me feel real good. All right. Chapter 1. James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in dispersion. Before we get to those highlights, though, James may have been, give me 1 second, may have been among Jesus's family who at first opposed him. The reason some believe that comes from Mark. If you go to Mark, you go to chapter 3. Thanks for confirming. You go to chapter 3 and you read 20 and 21, as well as 31 through 35. There is an indication that there was an opposition to James in some fashion. It's one of those things like if you care about this stuff and you're interested in it, maybe go look at it. If you're not, total waste of brain space, move on. But after Jesus' ascension, James became a leader of the church, as both Paul and Luke indicate. 1 Corinthians has references, Galatians has references, and Acts has references. He was important. There's no question. More specifically, several scenes about the Jerusalem church imply that James was the leader, not a leader, the leader of the Jerusalem church. That's significant, just historically, as well as in the grand scheme of Christian history. It's a significant thing. It is not something to just be washed over. So going back to the two blue highlights, the 12 tribes and dispersion. Although the 12 tribes, the divisions ceased to function as geopolitical units before. In 722 BC, the 12 tribal divisions, they stopped functioning as geopolitical units. Biblical writers continued to reference them this way. They used this designation for Israel. So that's the reference. Even though technically it's not true at this point in history, Jewish authors continued to identify them that way. The prophets of the Old Testament used this term to refer to the future restored people of God. References there are in Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Zechariah. In the dispersion, this is usually a reference to Jews living in or scattered outside of Israel. So they're outside of the Holy Land, possibly suggesting that James wrote to the Jewish believers in these areas, that he was singling them out specifically. The 12 tribes could have a symbolic sense about them, representing all God's people under the new covenant who are scattered from their true homeland until God's promise comes to fruition. meaning Christ comes back. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. All joy, or nothing but joy, or supreme joy, depends on your translation. He's referring to an extended state of well-being, of rightness with oneself, rather than an immediate feeling of happiness or pleasure. It's something that you will not grasp in the English, much easier to grasp in Greek and even in Latin. But in English, tough to grasp. We use these terms so much. We water down our language dramatically. In Greek, I mean, most people know this, but as an example, the most obvious example you're ever going to hear, the word love. Many different words for love. Many different terms for love. Why? Because there are different kinds of love. Joy is similar. So many different describing words are very similar. Joy is no different. Different uses of it come down to context as well as the actual word in Greek, which is why this is one portion, like many in the Bible, you're going to see several different several different translations of it, depending on what usually a council or a board or a few scholars decide is most appropriate when they're doing their version of the translation. So it is an extended state of well-being and rightness with oneself. It is the opposite. It's antithetical to the immediate feelings of satisfaction or happiness. It's enduring joy. When you meet trials or encounter, depending on your translation, the plural Greek verb that is used, indicates that James is speaking to a group. He's speaking to the entire church rather than an individual. And we'll get more into that as we read the rest of James. But this is a targeted letter, but to a large body. He encourages a community of believers undergoing trials for their faith, not just individuals experiencing personal difficulty. The translation I've got is the ESV. I don't read anything else unless I'm doing parallels to look at something. But the only actual translation that I read is the ESV. I prefer it and I have a bias towards it. Just in all honesty, I have a bias towards it. Various trials in the red. The Greek word that is used here refers to an unwelcome or unexpected experience. So something you could not count on, or at least that you were not counting on. James may be referring also to trials in general, or to specific hardships, such as persecution. The reason that is insinuated is because as we continue going through, you'll see this pop back up several times, and it begins as you read the text. It begins to seem as if it is more of a specific hardship, or maybe a group of specific hardships that have to do with persecution. That begins to make sense as you read more, therefore adding context and getting a greater picture of the overall issue within the text. The two biggest ones in James are sickness and poverty, that he's going to go over quite a bit. All right, verse 4, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete. That is also translated as mature and complete. This is one scenario of many where I regret to say I don't like the way the ESV translates it. I like mature better. I think it makes more sense with the context. Perfect, and maybe it's just because we watered down the word perfect in America. I don't find it as adequate. But anyways, mature and complete, or perfect and complete, depending on your translation. Those who are suffering should have joy, that long-lasting joy, not the instant gratification joy, because trials serve as a path to Christian maturity, which is why I like the word maturity rather than perfect. There is no such thing as perfect Christianity. There's no such thing as a perfect Christian. There is such a thing as a mature Christian, which is a massive differentiator and a huge reason why I prefer that over perfect. It just makes more sense. And it's more realistic. And I have a bias. Complete and mature individuals show integrity and single-minded devotion to God. They are characterized by godliness, not by belief. They're not characterized by belief. Just like salvation is not achieved by belief. It's not that simple. Could perfect and complete be translated as ripe? Ooh. I suppose. It's an interesting question. I wouldn't want to say. I don't like to say an answer if I'm not confident in it. I don't know, actually. Maybe. I think that leaves a lot open to kind of, I guess, no, it doesn't. I don't know. I would say yes. I'd be interested, man, to see if any translation uses that term. It'd be easy to find out. You can do parallel word searches. I'd be interested to know, because I think that would be another pretty decent replacement. Because I mean, ripeness is it's a stance of maturity. It's just a different term for it. People think like fruit, obviously, right? But ripeness can be in reference to many things, not just fruit or vegetables. But it still shows what? It shows maturity and growth. It shows where you are. I like that. That's an interesting thought. That beard is getting dense and healthy. Oh, God. You know the number of guys who have like messaged me and been like, bro, I jealous of the beard. I'm like, I don't even think about it until I start growing it. And then I'm like, wow, this is kind of nice. Keeping with fruit metaphors. Yeah, no, I like that. I like the ripe. That's I don't see why it wouldn't work. I guess it would be my definitive answer. I don't see why it wouldn't work. I like that. Perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and will be given him. Wisdom. It's a reference to the knowledge of God's plan, purpose, and the ability to live in accordance with that. It's exactly what that is. Wise people can identify the nature and the purpose of the trials that they're going through. And James is big on trials. You got to get that in your head. That's the context of where we're at. Trials, issues, perseverance, endurance. This is James. It's a very motivating text in the context specifically of worldly trials. So wise people can identify the nature and the purpose of the trials and understand how to then overcome them. Ask God, or let him ask for it from God, depending on your translation. James describes God as the giver of wisdom. He is the source of wisdom, which aids sufferers in their trials. This seems like a given. However, there's a reason that the authors of the New Testament say this over and over again, and then solidify it by confirming that this is what they mean. That God, they speak of wisdom, and they confirm, because they feel like they need to, the idea that wisdom, the source of it, is God. Why? Because culture was just as broken during this time as it is right now. It just looked different. And we have a lot more people now. So it has much more volume. But the issues were the same. You had a culture of people who were obsessed with the wrong things. Considering Corinth again, but most of these places were very similar. Where did wisdom come from? In their eyes. It came from the philosophers. It came from the religious people. It came from those with educations. So the Christian rebellion, which is what it was, regardless of how Candyland you want it to be, Christianity in the beginning was a rebellion. Jesus was a rebel. He was an anti-establishment rebel. So early Christianity, the way they were trying to convert all these people's minds from this idea that people supply wisdom with God supplies wisdom. Even the Jews who believed in God would put religious and educated people up on pedestals and overlook God. So a huge part of the early Christian movement was refocusing people on, you need wisdom, you need this, you need that, and all of these things, they source from one thing, and it's God. 6, I think. Yeah. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, that is driven and tossed by the wind. Ask in faith. Ask in faith. James, Graves is here. Big Yukon Cornelius vibes. Who is Yukon Cornelius? You guys always throw out references, and I feel so uncultured. I have no idea who that is. I'll have to Google in a second. All right, James describes faith that manifests itself in action, which is why I love him. I'm going to say it again. He describes faith as a manifestation of sort in reference to actions, not thoughts, not beliefs, not good intentions, actions, behavior, external behavior. God hears the prayers of those whose lives demonstrate that they have faith in him. I'm going to read that again too. God hears the prayers of those who live lives that demonstrate they believe and have faith in him. So twofold. Yeah, pray. But should your life, your actions, your behaviors, the way you treat people, not reflect your faith, your belief, it is dead. It is worthless. You may as well go enjoy the world, in my opinion, but also in the opinion of James. And I'm going to take James's opinion over some idiot on the internet who's trying to put me in my place, like my last video. I skipped the ad. I'm sorry if that got stuck on anybody. So he's saying actions are required. Behavior is required. Faith, cool. Need to have it. Good to have it. Very important. But you need to demonstrate your faith by your actions. And this will reflect that you have the faith in the first place. The wording that is used does not imply that people must have a certain degree or standard of faith for God to hear their prayers, but it does indicate that they have to demonstrate that they have the faith in order for God to hear their prayer. A wave of the sea. Some translations say the surf of the sea. James is describing a life of instability, like a wave, very unstable, and uncertainty. Characteristics of one who doubts, who does not have that faith or stability, as a continual succession of waves, which is kind of beautiful. It's a great representation of it. That is driven and tossed by the wind. Verse 7, for that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. Can you just read that again, dude? I love James. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. To me, this is clear as day. This is why I get so lost with Christians when they want to spout these ideologies within. That's super clear. The person who lives a life like the surf of the sea, like a wave, with instability and morality, instability in action, instability in behavior, that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. Not my opinion. That's what the Bible says. Clear as day. He is a double-minded man, clear as day, unstable in all his ways. How the hell can you not fully understand what he's saying? That's what I don't get. I'm going to try really hard not to rant. I get real fired up when I read James because it's just like, this is everything I believe, as clear as could be. And he makes a statement and then he backs it, and then moves on to the next idea so that nobody could possibly be confused. Nobody could be confused. Must not suppose you will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. That could not possibly be more clear. He's describing someone who tries to live two contradictory lifestyles. Can we talk about Thursday? Was it this last Thursday that we watched the Hillsong video? Which wasn't Hillsong, I learned later. I had to make a correction. Whatever that was, though, that's double-mindedness. These are people who sit on the stage and say, in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name. Guarantee they're not like that behind closed doors. Bet my life on it. They are different. They are living a double life. They are the fruity pastor on the stage, the motivational speaker on the stage. They're not like that outside of that, man. Guarantee. I mean, I guarantee because I worked for one of those churches. I saw them off the stage. That's not who they are. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. Some translations
are kind of different in some parts of James, and this is one of them. A brother of humble circumstances is another translation for this. The community that James is addressing, it's an indication that they might have been facing issues or conditions of poverty. And that becomes more apparent, again, as we continue to go through. You gain more context that supports that. Boasting, or the rich in his humiliation, is conveying the sense of being glad or joyful rather than the familiar sense of arrogant boasting. So it's Paul's version of boasting. If you read about Paul when he says, I boast in Christ, I boast in this, it's not a pride thing. It's not an arrogant thing. It's him. It's like this outburst of joyfulness. It's him wanting to put what he has through God on blatant display. Like a flower of the grass. It's imagery from Isaiah. Actually, if you go to Isaiah 40:6 and 7, you can also get an indication from Psalm as well as Job. But he likens their destruction, their unraveling, to the grass, which is going to wither in the heat. He will pass away. He said, 11, for the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flowers fall and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. 12, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Blessed is the man. Don't want to go into that. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to decide here. Yeah. All right. So within the specific context, blessed is a man who remains steadfast under trial. Blessed or blessed, it's the description of an attitude of determined courage that is unaffected by circumstantial events or situations. Meaning, again, just as an obvious reference, think about Paul in prison when Philippians was written. Most believe when Philippians was written, at least partially, or perhaps through someone else, it was while or very close to when Paul was incarcerated. Philippians reads extremely emotionally and in a motivational sense. Why? Well, Paul's trying to get through prison. He's literally being persecuted as it's being written. He's going through something that is extremely difficult. So part of what he needs for himself comes through in that epistle. And he's writing to the church at Philippi, and he's also writing absolutely to himself. And it's very obvious when you read it that he's trying to encourage himself while he's trying to encourage them. So blessed is the attitude of determined courage while being unaffected by your external circumstances. So if you are having a hard time paying your bills and you're dealing with your kids in a school that are teaching things you don't agree with, and you have all of these external things that are weighing on you, it's continuing to have that lasting joy in spite of what is going on. Both should go hand in hand. Once without, I have issues with doubt. One without the other is useless in the context of, yeah, absolutely. If you have faith without action, you're trash. In all, you guys know me. I don't mean it actually, but you're trash. And if you have actions without faith, in my opinion, you're less trash, but you're still kind of trash. Because here's the thing, in society in general, can you have atheists perform good works? Yes. They might not be able to fully express why they're good, because from an atheist perspective, morality doesn't make any damn sense, but they can still go do good things. They can go serve at a soup kitchen, or they can go donate all their stuff to charity, whatever. They're able to do that. However, somebody who has faith, but does not put that into action, you're just absolute garbage. You're a waste of air. In my humble opinion, you're a waste of air. I would prefer atheists who do good works populating the earth over Christians who don't do a damn thing any day, which is why I tend to lean towards atheists more than likely. I'm really well educated in Christianity, have experienced miracles, healings, and have been a believer for over 30 years. I feel like technically I should know better, kind of like Thomas. I don't think time has anything to do with it. at all. I mean, I doubt all the time. I think, honestly, if you have Christians who say they don't doubt ever, I think they're brainwashed. I don't think any cognitive thinking human being functions without any doubt, because it means you really don't think that much. I think if you're somebody who genuinely uses your brain and thinks, whether it's within a Christian context or a secular context, if you're thinking enough and you're cognitive enough, you're going to doubt things. It doesn't matter how. I'm super confident. I'm a very confident guy. I'm very like set in my ways. I'm very comfortable in my ways, but I still doubt things all the time. I doubt myself all the time. I doubt actions and choices all the time. I doubt God all the time. But I'm extremely comfortable and confident in what I believe about God. Still doubt it. I still doubt things. I'm super confident in who I am, like my principles, my morals, my behavior, my actions. I still doubt moves that I make all the time. I was telling Kat right before this, I was driving home from dropping my kid off, and I was feeling doubt about personal choices and things like that. Rodriguez, I don't think that ever goes away. I don't think it matters at all. I think you're going to always hold that. And I think all that means is that you're in a really good place, because it means you're using your brain. You're thinking about things, even overanalyzing to the point that doubts come in. But I don't know. From my perspective, I think that's totally positive. I think it's absolutely positive if you carry doubt. Unless you let it destroy you, then that would be negative. It's just like shame and guilt. They're not bad feelings. If you let them take you over because you're emotionally unintelligent, then shame and guilt are bad feelings. And so is doubt. But if you're emotionally intelligent enough to feel the feeling and then do something with the feeling, I think it's totally positive. And it makes me very confident that you're in a good place. Christians who don't experience doubt are brainwashed. Moving on. Okay. 13. I guess the rest of 12. Blessed, steadfast under the trials, for when he stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. 13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. One thing I want to point out with this is, one, Job would disagree. At face value, if you really get into Job, you'll know that it doesn't actually disagree. But at face value, I get Christians saying this a lot. James says God will not be tempted by evil, therefore will not tempt humanity. Job, God literally talks to Satan and says, okay, go F with Job. Go mess with Job. At face value. The only thing I'm going to say other than that is Job is the most theologically deep text of the entire Bible. So if you take it at face value, sure, that is what it says. It's not meant to be taken at face value. And we'll get into that super freaking deep when we go actually into Job. Shame, guilt, doubt, etc. are refining mechanisms, but you got to take the pot out of the fire eventually, or you'll be left with ashes. I love that. That's absolutely true. That's exactly it. All of those things are positive if you learn how to use them. If you use them as a weapon. I like the refining illustration. They're refining. But they can become absolutely destructive should you not use them to refine. And that's the whole tricky part about it. Then doubt is troublesome because it's more skeptical as opposed to questioning, which would be going in a different direction. I don't know. I'm skeptical as hell. If you don't know that about me, I mean, come on. I'm as skeptical as they come. Somebody tells me a story about something spiritual, I am the ass cat. Even her, and I trust her 100%. I don't think she would ever embellish or lie about anything. But I'm still absolutely skeptical if I hear certain stories about spiritual things. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, unless you let it sway you or pull you away from things that you inherently know are true. It all just depends. All of these things can be absolutely positive, but if you let them go unchecked, they'll become absolutely negative. So you need to be emotionally intelligent enough to use the feelings properly. And if you can't, get rid of them until you can. He's so deeply annoying, y'all. End of story. I said what I said. I am. I'm super skeptical. I'm very skeptical. My only point of concern personally is that I kind of run into a version of Pascal's wager, even though I have doubts. I'd rather be on the right side in case it's true. I get that. I get that. Of course I believe, but does it sometimes come from straight fear? Absolutely. And I wouldn't say most of Christians are like different than that. I think a lot of Christians believe because of nothing but fear. So if you believe due to logic and maybe emotion, mixed in there, and fear is the smaller portion, then I think you're in good shape. I think if fear is the majority of your belief system, then you don't actually believe. You're just afraid. You're using it as a safety blanket. That's not actually faith. That's just fear. That's you trying to pacify yourself because you're afraid. That's a very different thing. Let it come from straight awe. Nah, I don't question actual truth. Yeah, then I think you're good. If you don't question the things that aren't essential, you're brainwashed. To me, it's that simple. If you can read the Bible deeply, like I know you do, Rodriguez, if you read the Bible and your brain says all of this makes perfect sense, nothing contradicts anything else, we're all square, everything's kosher, you're brainwashed because there are absolute contradictions. There are things that absolutely don't make any sense at all. That's the Bible. That's the Bible. So if you're not questioning things like, that didn't make sense, that contradicted an epistle I read 2 weeks ago, then you're not actually thinking, because it does. Doubt is good. Doubt is good. Yeah, Wagner's quantum interpretation states that consciousness causes some form of wave function collapse. Some form of wave function collapse. Consciousness seems to play a primary role in determining what happens in reality. Well, consciousness is reality, right? Let's not go there. All right, anyways, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil with evil, and he himself tempts no one. What did that say? God himself tempts no one. That's a contradictory statement. As an example, there are other places in the Bible where God very obviously tempts people. There's no question. There is no question. Unless you are doing mental gymnastics to cover your tracks and make yourself feel good because you want the Bible to be absolutely perfect, that's an absolute contradiction. So then what do we do? What do we do, friends? Aggregate the information. Aggregate it. Which one shows up more? Which one has more validity per the entire scope of Scripture? That's the one to go with. No one who is being tempted should say, James is cautioning Christians against interpreting temptation of their sinful desires as a test from God. He's saying that is not what it's happening. As James makes clear in some more that we're going to get into, several of these future verses, humans alone are responsible for choosing to sin. You are not being tempted by God. I would equally say you don't really get tempted by anything else either. I think if you are being seriously tempted by, as Christians say, the enemy, Satan, whatever you want to say, the devil, the pitchfork guy, I think it means you're in a vulnerable state. And that should be the focus. Not that you're being tempted. Life is tempting. Existing on this earth is a temptation. We're surrounded by nothing but temptations. So Christians focusing on what is tempting them is a massive mistake. Focus on why you're feeling tempted. Consider me and 15 other people go downtown Chicago. The nightlife, it's Friday night, all sorts of stuff's going on. I am going to walk past everything with blinders on. And it's not really going to be intentional. I have conditioned myself to not care, to not have any interest in these things. At one point in my life, I did. Now I don't. Other people with me are going to be tempted by these things. So is the temptation actually the problem, or is the individual the problem? Us. We're the problem. Don't focus on the enemy tempting you, demons tempting you, evil tempting you, culture tempting you. No, That's never going to change. Focus on why you're feeling drawn to it. Why is it affecting you? Why are you feeling pulled? Thinking about the temptation is an absolute waste of time. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. How true. The Greek word for enticed, it describes a drawing in an unsuspecting victim with an attractive bait or lure. That's the type of enticement we're talking about. Somebody who's unsuspecting and is being attracted with a bait or lure of some kind. And that is what culture does. And that is what evil energy does. But it's negligible if you yourself are in a stable place where you don't notice that stuff. Or where you do what I call eye bouncing. When I used to talk to a lot of young men, and they talk about like, I see pretty girls all the time. Like I think about things all the time. You bounce. The minute you see somebody who you find very attractive, process that and bounce. Look at something else. You eye bounce. It's the same for anything else. It's alcohol or drugs or porn, whatever. You bounce. Get right off of it. I am being tempted by nope. By his own desires. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Gives birth to sin. James is using the analogy of human conception and birth to describe sin. Desire is conceived when a person yields to temptation. When you let yourself be drawn to the temptation, which then results in the birth of sin. As sin matures within the individual, it ultimately leads to death. If not God's judgment, which are kind of synonymous in an end times context. So conception, birth, sin, your desire is conceived when a person gives in to the temptation. That's the conception. That results in the birth, which is sin, and unchecked sin or sin that becomes mature leads to death, which is a consistent biblical belief. Need to have willpower. Yes, that's all it is. It's discipline and willpower. And everybody has the same capacity for it unless you literally biologically are not cognitively capable of it. But if you are cognitively capable, which I'd say easily probably 90% of the entire world's population is, you can hone discipline and willpower. It's just not easy. And our generation, the current living generations, they go towards what is easy, not what is right. 16, do not be deceived, my brothers, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Also translated, it's irrelevant. So no variation or shadow due to change. A fluctuation in light given off by the heavenly bodies contrasts with God's constant nature. So God is constant. Light is fluctuating. That's the imagery. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. The term first fruits is a reference to Israel. It's a very common reference. The first product of God's self-revelation to Abraham. If you go back to Jeremiah 2, you can read about that. Or to Christians. And there's a reference there to 1 Corinthians. As of yet, potential. Willpower seems to be a pushing force, and temptation would be a pulling force. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Because that's the thing I think people really get twisted. People think willpower is neutral in and of itself as a behavior. The willpower is not something that you need to do. It's not a force that comes out. It's like it's a stagnant state. It's a static state. which it's not. It's exactly what Ghost just said, in my opinion. Willpower is a push. It's an external force. And temptation, well, they're both external forces, but it's a force from you out. Temptation is a force from whatever you believe, I suppose, to you, or from culture to you. As of yet potential. Yeah, duality. Duality, man. It's a decision you need to make. It's all day, every day. Here's the thing. The outcome of your life is the culmination of tiny, small little choices that consist of every moment of every day. I mean, nobody changes overnight. You might get super motivated and want to change for the next couple days. It never lasts for anybody. It's every day. It's all day. Tiny little choices consistently, constantly, that pile up and turn into you changing bigger behaviors. It's just habits. Everything is compounding habit effects. You have whatever your habits are right now. Change them slowly, over time, but consistently. And then your overall, your larger, your macro habits will change. But all the micros need to change first. And everybody just wants like this very quick thing, because that's our culture. We live in the TikTok age. 19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. The righteousness of God. The Greek phrase that is used here describes the righteous character of God, or the righteousness that comes from God in a salvific context. So in the context of salvation. It may also refer to the righteousness that God expects from his people, which is, it makes sense within the context of James, because that's what he's primarily talking about. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. I love him. Do stuff. Don't hear stuff. What does the majority of mainstream Christianity do? We go to church on Sunday, we hear stuff, and then we go back to normal life until next Sunday. Explicitly spoken poorly about within the Bible that they're listening to. It's a doing religion. Christianity is a religion of doing stuff. Very little portion of it should be hearing things. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, the perfect law of liberty, James is most likely referring to the law of Moses, Mosaic law. He more likely, possibly, refers to the law of Moses as now perceived through a Christian context, through Jesus's interpretation and supplementation that you can read about in Matthew. So Jesus spoke about Mosaic law. James is referencing